This morning we have a blessing for the entire church, but it's coming in the form of a blessing of a child. Will you please come up here, Angela and Jimmy and Madeline? So this is the first time that the church has done a baby dedication in a few years. So we've printed the words in your order of service, and everyone gets to play a part, so go ahead and get your papers out now. So, Angela and Jimmy, what name have you chosen for this child?
Madeline Lee Franco.
Madeline Lee Franco. We welcome you among us. We give thanks for your life and for the new hope that you bring. So Madeline, hi Madeline. Hi little one. Hi. So first we want to share with you the blessing of this beautiful earth that we walk on. The earth which gives strength and also gives life its shape. We bless you with the earth. And second, we're going to bless you with the air. The air which gives the blessing of intelligence and thought and also gives life its breath. And now we're going to give you the blessing of water, and this is the water that comes from our water ceremony that we did as a church at the beginning of this year. So this water comes from this congregation and all the places it's traveled. So we bless you with water, water which gives life emotion and love and refreshment. We're going to bless you with the fire of our chalice, the symbol of our faith. And fire, which blesses with the spark of creation and gives life its heat. She's very into this, as you can tell. And finally, we bless you with the rose. Yeah, that's a good one. The rose which represents beauty and the grace of life unfolding, just like your life is unfolding right now. You want it? The congregation, will you welcome Madeline with the words written in your order of service?
We will delight in your accomplishments. We will share in your sorrows. We will encourage you in every way and show you with adulthood. And whatever may come to you, whether misfortune, affliction, or wrongdoing, we promise never to close our hearts against you.
And will Madeline's extended family please rise? If you'd like to share in welcoming Madeline, the words are also printed in your order of service.
We will support you and your parents in this new adventure. We will hold you all in love and compassion. We will be additional sources of learning and love for you as you grow.
You may be seated. Go ahead.
Okay. We, your parents, dedicate ourselves to all that we can to provide you with roots so that you may feel safe, and wings so that you may fly. We will strive to share with you the beauty and the goodness of life.
We will support
you and your family through all the experiences of life. Welcome, Madeline. And will you all please rise in either body or in spirit and join us in a responsive reading number 470 in your gray hymnals. 470. I will read the regular typeface and you respond with the words printed in italics. We affirm the unfailing renewal of life.
Rising from the earth and reaching toward the sun, all living creatures shall fulfill themselves.
We affirm the steady growth of human companionship.
Rising from ancient cradles and reaching toward the stars, people the world over shall seek the ways of understanding.
We affirm a continuing hope.
That out of every tragedy, the spirits of individuals shall rise to build a better world.
And will you remain standing in either body or spirit and join us for our sermon hymn, which is number 210, Wade in the Water. So we're going to do this a little bit differently today. So many of you have told me that the reason that you came to this church is because of its commitment to social justice, its history of leading during civil rights and with integration, and its commitment to the Austin neighborhood. And I share these commitments with you, and I am inspired by your vision and your hope for the future. I also know that creating beloved multicultural community can be both a joy and a challenge. I know that it's not easy. I talked with you earlier this month about my experience of building cross-cultural community and relationships with Unity Church Unitarian in St. Paul and the Above Every Name congregation. So today we're going to go into that story a little bit deeper and examine the complexities, the joys and the challenges. And we have a special guest with us here today who is Pastor Danny Gibbons of the Above Every Name congregation. And Danny, will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Above Every Name?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm Pastor Danny Gibbons Jr. Above Every Name Ministries, actually, in today's date is what, the 19th? In 5 days, my church will be 4 years old. New church plan. I received a call to ministry while I was in prison, serving a 12-year prison term. And God began to speak to me about the work that was to be done. And so the ministry that was placed upon my heart was a ministry that was unlike no other. I'm from a Christian background, and I had detached myself from the church just because of some of the traditions and things that didn't necessarily, resonate with who I was. And it wasn't that I was abandoning the faith or putting my mouth against it. It was more about wanting to build a church community and congregation that would truly be for the people. And so the name of my church, Above Every Name, comes out of the scripture. And the thematic truth behind the name is that I realized that throughout my life in the world and the community that I grew up in, that there were labels and social stigmas that were placed upon my people and or people had placed upon themselves. And because of those names and those labels and social stigmas, many of us lived them out, or many of us were bound by them. And having to come to a place where you can express your faith and share the liberty of being freed from the chains of the names and the stigmas and the labels that we've placed upon ourselves or have been placed upon us. And so I started the church. It was maybe 2 or 3 days before Palm Sunday. I put a Facebook blast out, and we opened the doors on Easter Sunday, and 300 and something people showed up saying that they wanted to resonate with it. That's exciting, that's great. And the next Sunday, 16 people showed up. Because pastoring a church is like driving a bus. People get on and get off, but you got to keep rolling.
So I told you a little bit about Unity, which is the Unitarian Universalist congregation in St. Paul that partnered with Danny. And Unity went in and out of a social justice focus over its 145-year history. And when they first interacted with Above Every Name, they had just come out of a long period of very intense inward focus, and they were hungering for social justice. So they called co-ministers Rob and Jan Eller-Isaacs, and shortly after they called Rob and Jan, about 15 years ago, they started deliberate anti-racism training in the congregation. They created an anti-racism leadership team, and they spent a decade examining racism and white privilege embedded in the systems of Unity Church Unitarian. They spent a decade talking to each other about their experiences with race and ethnicity and trying to figure out how to be an anti-racist institution. They spent 10 years, more than 10 years, doing this kind of work. And in the fall of 2013, they met Pastor Gibbons. Do you want to say anything about how you met Unity?
So the work with Unity came about. Unity Church is planted in the heart of the community that I grew up in, the Rondo community. And so I was, at that time, had just lost my younger brother. He was 33 years old and had died in my arms shortly after Easter Sunday in 2013. And I was in this really a heavy state of grief and just, loss and detachment, and happened to get up every Sunday and preach, and was going through some relationship challenges and all of these things. And then on top of that, I get a letter from the place that we were renting space from saying it was no longer financially advantageous for them to rent space for us. They were a retreat center and we were a growing church. And so the transition between the two was cumbersome. They loved the partnership that we had, and we left on a high note and great accord, but then we had to find a place. And for me, a place is the most important thing when you're talking about bringing people together, to have a space within that place to share their faith experiences. And so I didn't want just any kind of place, and I wanted a place in the neighborhood that I grew up in because I wanted to serve that community. So it got down to the wire. I had 90 days to find a place, and it got down to about maybe 11 or 12 days, and I had visited 30 churches in 10 days. Visited the church that I grew up in, that my grandmother was one of the founding pillars and members of, visited another church that my other grandparents were deacons and leaders in that church, visited churches throughout my community that I knew, and everybody was just like, no. Just that simple. And I went not with the semblance of a pastor, because I wanted them to accept and receive me for who I was. I could have put on the suit and the tie and all that stuff and went in and speak the King's English, but I just wanted to be me. And so on a night walk one night by my mother's house, I was walking and walked past this church and noticed that it looked different. There used to be this 14-foot wall or something outside. I didn't remember, I just remember it looked different. And now they had this remodel, this renovation that happened where it was open and accessible and it was life-giving and there was a fountain out there. And I remember stopping and saying, I would love to worship here. Woke up the next morning and was having coffee with my mother like we normally do. And she said, you know, you should go and visit that white church over there. And so I walked in the doors and walked throughout the corridors and walked to the front desk and saw my godmother. And I looked at her and said, well, what are you doing here? She said, what are you doing here? And she said, I work here. And next to her was the executive director, Barbara Hubbard, and the director of Congregational Life, Lisa Friedman. And she said, well, this is my godson who was a pastor who I was telling you about. And long story short, we went into the center room and I talked and told them my story. And they extended the olive branch and said, we're going to make this work. They made it work by faith because the senior ministers, co-ministers, Jan and Rob, were on sabbatical in Europe. And they sent an email to them saying, hey, there's this young black preacher that's come in that wants to share some space, and, you know, how do you feel about it? Immediately they said, no. And Lisa and Barbara said, trust us. And we opened the doors of our church August 4th, 2013, and had our first service there, and we're still there.
So a little bit of backstory on that wall, the wall that came down. So when Rob and Jan started leading Unity Church Unitarian, and they started this process of having a conversation of what Unity Church Unitarian's values were and what its mission was in the world. And these conversations got deep. They got real. They spent 6 months on 2 sentences talking about what their mission was in the world and what that really, really meant. Their board did it, their small groups did it, they did it in listening sessions with the people. They got serious. Who are we? And whose are we? And part of what they came up with that second question, whose are we, was that they didn't only belong to the members of the congregation. Because if they only belonged to the people in the pews, if it was just the members to whom they were accountable, then all they would do is perpetuate themselves exactly as they were, without change, and sometimes with numbers falling. And so they said, actually, we are accountable to a larger community than just the people who are sitting in these pews. They said, we are accountable to this neighborhood, which means that the neighborhood has a say in who we are. It's not just us. We are responsible for relationships with people and for listening to the people of this neighborhood and the people of this city. Because we do not belong to ourselves alone. We belong to the world. And the world starts right here when we open our doors. And so one of the things that came out of this deep conversation about who we are, what do we value, what is our mission, and whose are we, was that they looked at this 14-foot stone wall outside the front of the church, and they said, well, that doesn't seem very welcoming. That stone wall doesn't say, come in. It doesn't say, we want you here. It says, you know, this is a wall, stay out. So they decided, with much controversy, deep, painful controversy in the church, that they were going to take the wall down. The wall encircled the entrance of the church. They were going to take the wall down and make it an open space and change the walls in the front of the church so that they were glass, so that you could see inside from the outside. And they had a huge capital project, and some of their major donors said, not gonna do it. But they raised the money anyway. They took the wall down and they replaced it with glass so that you could see in. And one might not think that a building project is the automatic manifestation of understanding more deeply what your mission is. And of course this world is complex and you never know what roads are going to lead where, but that open space was what brought Danny in. And they talked to a number of other community leaders who said, I had a different understanding of your church after I saw the new entrance. The pastor of the other congregation that joined us in Beloved Conversations said the same thing. He said, oh my gosh, when I saw that new entrance, I felt wanted. I felt welcome. I felt like I could come into the church for the first time. So we speak in many ways, and it's not always just with our voices. Sometimes it's in our cultural behaviors, and sometimes it's in our buildings, and sometimes it's in whether the gate is locked or open, and sometimes it's in whether there's a 14-foot brick wall outside of your entrance. So this was another one of the ways that they lived out their mission and vision, and it had consequences. So Danny and I met when I was the intern last year at Unity, and we co-led a conversation series called Beloved Conversations, which, as I told you before, is a curriculum based on having conversations on race and faith and ethnicity in a way that engenders joy. And so I've told you a little bit of the story of joy already and the deep connections that were built in this conversation series, but I also want to tell you about the mistakes. Because we made mistakes. I made mistakes. My colleagues at Unity made mistakes. Danny made mistakes. His colleagues at Danny never makes mistakes. Danny's real name is Beatrice. And his colleagues at Above Every Name made mistakes. But we also fell in love. All of us fell deeply in love with one another. And it was that love, the love that held us through the mistakes. So we were able to make mistakes with one another because we trusted each other to stay at the table and to come back and to keep talking through and listening to one another. And this is why I want to make the claim that it is real relationships across boundaries, across cultural boundaries, that are the stability for racial justice work. This congregation is so beautiful, and it understands deeply and has a strong analysis of what racism and white privilege is. But I want to encourage us to think about how we're living out our analysis in real relationships, because relationships are the place where we actually learn what's going on. Relationships are the place where we actually have our stuff bumping up against somebody's other stuff, and then we have to talk it through.
And so the bumps in the road, in my opinion, are what create the cohesion in relationships. It's in conflict that you come to understand more of the heart of the people that you're around. And so when we were doing this work, one, we were getting to know each other for the first time. Two different faith backgrounds and traditions, two different ethnicities and cultures, having come from different regions of the United States, and all of those factors were there, and then coming to the table also with wounds, hurt, scars, historical trauma, fear. All of those pieces that come to the table when you're building new relationships that oftentimes get glossed over with the excitement or the enamoring of that new relationship. And so as I begin to grow in those spaces, you know, I kind of coined the term that I've been doing, and I feel like I started doing it with Ms. Jennifer here. Ms. Jennifer was theological yoga. Right? I felt like I was doing theological yoga in love. And sometimes love gets hot, and they got hot yoga, right? Sometimes love, puts you in places where things get, fiery and all of those things, and you have to stretch in the fiery discomfort of that position of love and sit there until the enlivenment of who you are as a person resonates with that moment. And it's only through beloved conversations, crossing racial boundaries, crossing faith boundaries, crossing ethnic boundaries, crossing social economic boundaries. And when that happens, it brings you to places like TUC.
So I want to say a word about discomfort. I don't particularly like it. I do not like being uncomfortable. My experience in white cultures is that white folks don't particularly like being uncomfortable. We back up off that real quick. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to be in conflict. I don't want to make somebody feel bad. I don't want to have myself feel bad. I don't want to feel guilty. I don't want to feel like I'm a bad racist. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't. And there are a lot of things that I will do to get out of feeling uncomfortable. There are gymnastics that I will do to get out of feeling uncomfortable. But part of what we did in Beloved Conversations is we made the commitment to sit in discomfort with one another, to be real about the anger, to be honest about what we were feeling, to call love, love, and to call hate, hate, and to call fear, fear, and to stay with one another through that. And it was not comfortable. But it was incredibly spiritually enlivening. It was the most real work that I have done. So it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't fun. I can't recommend you to do this as the easy path. But I can recommend you to do this as the path that will set your soul free and on fire at the same time. Because even though it's not comfortable, it's spiritually deepening. It's the reality of the whole. It's being honest about yourself and your relationship with your neighbors. And it's about living our commitment to love out in the world in a way that we wouldn't otherwise. So I encourage approaching these interactions with cross-cultural humility. Some of the things that I learned in conversations with Pastor Gibbons, with Danny, were about my own culture and the way that it was showing up in our relationships in ways that I had never even thought that that was cultural. Right? But I'm white, and I live in white culture, and so I don't usually have to look at what white culture is, because it's the dominant culture. So I would send Danny 15 emails, and I wouldn't get any response. And I'd be like, what is he doing? I'm working here all by myself, and I'm getting no response to any of these emails that he's sending me. And finally, I got frustrated with him, and I maybe expressed some heat, did a little hot yoga there, and I was like, Dave, what are you doing? I need you to show up, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, I don't operate on email the way that you do. Like, do you need to send me 15 emails? Could you just pick up the phone and call me sometime? And I was like, oh. And we found a new way of working. But we had to have that conversation. I had to be honest about what I was feeling, and then I had to step back and say, oh, maybe I'm not right here. Maybe I have a cultural expectation around how we work that's not shared.
And she did. She did. And she huffed and she puffed and she came downstairs and and I'm serious. And with that, the commitment to that covenant affords you opportunities in that discomfort to be your authentic self. And when you have a commitment to covenant in love, no matter what you go through, no matter what challenges you bring, just like we shared covenant today with beautiful Madeline and her family, we made a commitment as a congregation to stay at the table, which is sometimes not the easiest thing to do, especially when your heart rate is beating and you're uncomfortable or you're frustrated or you have anxiety or you're just naturally the kind of person that would just withdraw and just don't really like conflict and just rather to just, just let it be and I'll be okay. But this kind of relationship that you have with one another, if we're going to get to the real gold, we got to do the work. And so the work is not in being brutally honest, because sometimes when we call hate, it sounds brutally honest. But it's really a way in which we tell the truth in love. And so Jennifer began to grow me in ways that I hadn't understood, because my interaction with the white culture had been different. And it wasn't that Jennifer just brought her culture to the table. There was also gender differences that brought the table. In Jennifer's words, in this patriarchal world, she's not going to allow those differences to devalue or demean her. And a part of the cultural narrative that I grew up with wasn't necessarily one where there was a narrative that said there was this patriarchal thing. It just was what it was. And so I hadn't had a level of awareness be brought to me in love, because I wasn't raised by men. I was raised by a strong black woman and I have 7 sisters, 7 strong black females. So I had to understand some different things, but it was different when you're dealing with a strong white woman. And I say that in affirmation and admiration, because she didn't back down. Sometimes the uncomfort or the discomfort, again, will cause us just to back away and back down. But Jennifer got in my face. And I was, ooh, but it was that kind of work that got us to this place to where we really could experience our faith in meaningful ways. That we could transcend the challenges and the social barriers and stigmas that often come with work like this. Because when I came to Unitarian Universalism as a partner, my Christian partners were saying, well, I'm sure you're a light in the midst of that darkness. Well, those people are sure lost. Or you're dealing with all of those spirits over there. And I just simply replied by saying, the only spirit that I deal with